Welcome to the Energy Show. It's April 2nd, 2025. And this is our second show of the day. And we're recording this at 4 p.m. Pacific because President Trump has just finished his speech, his announcement about tariffs. And there wasn't no announcement about Canada and Mexico. So we assume that the status quo holds. I'm going to talk to Ed Hurst, an economics professor from the University of Houston, has been on the show before. And has an interesting take on the president's economic theories. So welcome to the Energy Show, Ed.
Thank you, Mark.
Now we're going to get into this. You and I both watched his presentation, and we have many things to talk about. It won't be about Canada and Mexico specifically, because not much changes from a tariff point of view, but it's his worldview that we want to talk about today, and I guess maybe implications for Canada and Mexico. But you have a very interesting idea for how Canada can kind of clap back at some of the Trump tariffs. Give us your idea.
Right. So, if we remove the energy purchases that the United States makes from Canada, then the Canadians get into a trade surplus with the U.S. That's let's toss lumber in. So, for example, what would Canadian response to this war be if they really wanted to counter a game of hardball with a game of slapshot? Cut the exports of oil. That's 4 million barrels a day down to the United States. Cut the electricity production that comes across the border to the United States. Cut the lumber sales to the United States. We could, Canadians can sell the lumber to IKEA. They need it. You can get the oil out to the coast using crude by rail. It'll be difficult, a little expensive, but hey, the realignments of the markets across the world will make that pay off. And as for the electricity, the Canadians can start advertising for the data centers that are really not going to be able to be built in the United States right now, simply because there are not enough gas turbines, there's not enough gas pipelines, there are not enough places to actually get the affordable energy to Alexa, to Siri, to Copilot, the AIs that we're using day in, day out.
Ed, okay, let me summarize your proposal. There is a huge explosion of demand for artificial intelligence services. They require data centers. All of the companies, Microsoft, Google, on and on and on, want to build data centers. So for other reasons, but primarily for AI. And a lot of it was going to go down into the United States. So first of all, the US power grid right now, I think it's fair to say is kind of fragile. The NERC, the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation, which handles both Canada and the US, has issued warnings of potential grid outages over the last year or two, and it got worse this over the winter. So we might be doing the Americans a favor if we move data centers up north.
Well, just from a competitive position, the Canadian electricity, especially the hydroelectric, is a lot less expensive than anything the Northeast United States can generate. Pretty much the same through the mid-continent region down through Michigan. So the Canadians have a tremendous competitive advantage, and Trump is pushing everybody back to become competitive. Why not use it? Especially with crude oil. The United States is going to have to find it from someplace. Domestically, the U.S. cannot produce the grade of crude that comes from Canada. So, we're going to have to go more to the friends of Saudi Arabia and Venezuela.
The dictator oil that the Albertans are so fond of. Okay, well, we've introduced a number of topics here, so let's just stick for now with the data center and the electricity. One of the things that has come up in our conversations around Alberta, and I'm sure this is true in other parts of Canada, is that, for example, down in the southwest part of Alberta, they have huge wind farms, been around for 20, 30 years. And one of my acquaintances, James Van Leeuwen, says there's a huge data trunk that runs right in the ditch along the highway in the midst of these wind turbines. He says, if you wanted to put a data center, that would be the best place because you've got a big main data trunk and you've got electricity that basically during when the wind is blowing is only a couple cents a kilowatt hour. That's the kind of thing that you're envisioning, correct?
That's it exactly. Even in Eastern Canada with all the hydroelectric power, tremendously inexpensive. In essence, think about it as integrating the product. The product is electrons. And so we're going to go from the low value electrons to the high value electrons, those that are reminding you that it's time to buy new underwear or replace your filters and your heating or cooling units, those types of things. That's where the money is, and electricity, of course, is just the catalyst, the grease, if you will, that allows that business to go forward.
And here's another thing that I don't think you and I have spoken about this, but I think it's commonly accepted among economists that hydro dams are actually really good batteries for intermittent power generation like wind and solar. And the idea for anybody who hasn't run into this before is that when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, you're creating all this really cheap electricity. Then like for instance, if Alberta was doing that and selling that to BC, which has 34 hydro dams, could either reduce or stop the water flowing through those generators, back up the water into their reservoirs. When the sun stops shining, they let the water through the reservoirs and then they sell electricity back into Alberta, which now, of course, needs it. And what that does, and this is an important thing, the value of an electron used for storage is much higher than a value of an electron simply sold to a residential or commercial or industrial customer. So generate the most value of the electrons you are making.
Right. Well, pump storage has been part of hydroelectric for decades. It's certainly something worth doing. But one aspect that this strategy would basically expose is the myth of energy independence of the United States.
Yes.
Trump 1.0, Biden, Trump 2.0 have been crowing about American, United States energy independence. The country isn't. It's extraordinarily dependent upon imports. It has not built the infrastructure to maintain its own electrical grid. Back in 2017, Mason Woolrich, the former co-chair of the California Independent System Operator, wrote a book called Modernizing America's Electricity Infrastructure. At that point, he was projecting over $2 trillion in necessary expenditures just to maintain the level of service at 2017. Across the United States, the grids are highly fragmented. I think there are 3,500 individual entities that make up the delivery system, the supply chain from fuel to generator to wires to local distribution to one's meter. It's a miracle the lights stay on in the United States every day. And for the most part, they do.
One of the things that and I should back up and say, I sit on the journalist panel for the United States Energy Association's technical media briefings. And so we get utility executives and system operator executives in, once a month, and we get to ask them questions. And they are absolutely frantic because they've had flat electricity demand for 15 years since the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. Now they're projecting 3 and sometimes 4% electricity growth. And at the same time, they are retiring thermal generation, coal and gas, faster than they can replace it with hydro, nuclear, wind, or solar.
Well,
and on top of that,
nobody's going to build.
No, I just want to finish my thought. And on top of that, as if that wasn't enough, they can't get the equipment like transformers to maintain and repair the grid they do have, never mind expand it. The American electricity system looks like it's in a crisis.
No, it absolutely is. We've underinvested in it for decades. The average coal-fired power plant is more than 50 years old. That's really at the end of its operating lifespan. In Texas, the most progressive grid, depending upon your perspective, or the one that it has replicated the old style Soviet system, Soviet Purchasing Bureau, which starves capital out of the system. The natural gas plants average more than 30 years in age. Essentially the modern ones are jet engines. Well, if you've been around for 30 years as a jet engine, it's time to change that turbine out. And of course, we know that these turbines are now backlogged into the short 2030s. It's a tremendous challenge. Battery technology is going to be necessary to charge the grid with or without renewable energy. In Texas, which is the extreme case of an electricity-only grid, where only those generators getting paid will get paid when they're generating electricity during the day. Those on the sidelines don't get paid. We're going to get to the point where everybody's off the sidelines. Everybody's trying to charge batteries.
Yeah.
The volatility in the Texas market is truly outstanding. It can go from minus 2 cents a kilowatt hour wholesale to $5 a kilowatt hour in the space of hours. And it does. It creates billions of dollars of windfall for the utilities. But here's the rub. No electric utility wants to build new power plants in Texas because that would reduce the volatility and it would reduce the payoff. Why build new power plants just to lose money?
Alberta has the other energy-only market in North America, and it's got exactly the same problem. So here we are. United States has got this creaky old grid that's really coming to a crisis. It doesn't produce as much oil as it needs. It produces 13.2 million barrels a day and sells for I think 6 outside of the country. It has 5.5 million barrels a day of heavy crude refining capacity that can't refined light sweet crude. It's got a tremendous amount of appetite for gas because of the LNG facilities that have been in Texas and Louisiana primarily. I mean, but listening to Trump, it's like the United States has been the victim of all of these horrible trading partners, Japan and Korea, and oh my God, Vietnam. He had a lot of things to say about Vietnam. And they've been beaten up and taken advantage of. And now he's going to rectify that. And now we're going to go back to this golden age from the 19th century where tariffs paid for everything and there's no income tax. It's like a fantasy, Ed.
The math doesn't work.
You're so diplomatic.
It's never going to work. We could look at this in a couple of different ways. Number one, it's Trump trying to raise taxes on the American taxpayer without actually calling it a tax on the taxpayer, a little sleight of hand. Bill Clinton gave the economy a huge boost by reducing the equity requirements for home purchases during his term. That, of course, came home with the housing crisis of 2005 through 2008. It began to tail off in 05, 08. So it's a game of sleight of hand, really. But just bringing in billions of dollars in new tariff revenues doesn't offset trillions of dollars in deficit spending. They still don't have it right. Eisenhower saw this very differently than Trump did. Eisenhower saw targeted tariffs, targeted import quotas, as he did for oil, to make sure the U.S. domestic industry could be maintained and have an opportunity to grow against very low-cost producers. I don't think anybody thinks Germany is a low-cost producer of automobiles, but that's the way President Trump is behaving. Now, the United States already has had 25% tariffs on imported trucks. That has gone back to the 60s. That's why Toyota has an extraordinarily large manufacturing facility in Texas. This takes years to work out. It's a lot of capital that needs to be moved around borders. And, we're not going to see that happen overnight. And plus, Trump's got mass deportations underway for the workers who support these facilities, the janitorial service, the painters. Everybody who contracts out for the refineries, the welding, the pipelines, you know, there are a bunch of things in conflict with this administration that they haven't reconciled yet.
One of the things he made this point over and over and over again. He said in 6 to 12 months it's going to take. We're going to hurt for 6 to 12 months, and then it'll all work itself out. But he said companies are going to begin moving factories back to the United States, and he blamed previous presidents, 30 years of them, for offshoring manufacturing to China and other countries. And he says now he said we're going to be an industrial power again, and we're going to use tariffs to make those companies come reinvest in plants in the United States to get behind the tariffs, and kind of like Toyota did. And I don't know. I mean, is there any validity to that argument?
I think there probably is, but it's not 12 to 18 months. We're talking 3 to 5 years. We don't have a skilled workforce to manage the production of some of these products. We're going to have to bring in a lot more migrants. We're going to have to use their universities to train our own guys. This is going to be a long-lasting disruption, and in the short run, we've got midterm elections coming in 2026, and the rallying cry for the Democrats, one they can probably manage, is it's the economy, stupid. In Texas, Senator Cornyn, who has been Senator Milquetoast for his entire tenure in the Senate, Joe Rogan can step up and defeat him. The congressman representing my district has no clue about the economy and has made no pronouncements except to fall in line blindly with the Trump leadership. This will cost them. The Republicans are going to have to stand up and come to the realization that being a Republican doesn't mean they have to continue to act stupidly.
Okay, there's another angle to this that we haven't talked about much, Ed, and that is it's very clear that China has now become the geopolitical challenger to the United States. And we heard last week that China now accounts for 45% of all manufacturing in the world. They are targeting, because I was reading about their third plenum that took place last year, they're targeting advanced manufacturing, they're targeting chips, they're targeting solar, wind, solar, batteries, and electric vehicles. Those are three of their clean energy technologies. So what that means is that technology is disrupting the power sector. That technology is disrupting auto manufacturing. I mean, the auto industry itself is it's in chaos as the legacy manufacturers respond to the disruption caused by the expansion of the Chinese industry. On and on and on. So you've got this tremendous upheaval in the global economy as capital, new technologies arise and industries fall and new ones take their place. And Donald Trump thinks it's the 19th century. This is surely you and your fellow economists are pulling your hair out watching this.
I don't have much left.
Well, that's why, Ed.
Now, what China is doing, China is becoming the merchant to the rest of the world. There's no way under the Trump regime that we're going to be the low cost manufacturer of anything. I mean, he's put 25% tariffs on steel. So the domestic steel producers in the United States raised their prices 25% even before he took office. And so now they're forging straight ahead. Are they happy about it? Yeah, absolutely. But will we be able to sell products to Africa, to subcontinent Asia? Answer, no. China is going to be covering Africa with solar panels, wind turbines, power plants. China will be the producer of choice for every major economy across the world. The U.S. is going to be diminished. Maybe, this may be the decline of the U.S. on a scale we haven't seen since the United Kingdom left the world stage following World War II.
Let's take aluminum, because that happens to be a product Canada provides 58% of the United States aluminum. And the reason we do it here is because we have 10 plants, one of them in BC, which is a hydro province, nine of them in Quebec, which is an amazingly, large hydro province. And essentially we're selling the Americans cheap electricity in the form of aluminum. I mean,
Right.
that's really what it comes down to. So if you put 25% a tariff on, thinking that somehow that aluminum is going to be manufactured in the US, you haven't got the bauxite, you haven't got the low cost electricity, you haven't got clean electricity, you've got none of the things that the competitive advantages that Quebec brings to the table in the first place. So all you've literally done is raise the price of aluminum by 25% for no discernible benefit to the American economy.
That's it exactly. And you know, the Trump administration has absolutely no defense against that argument. Let me add another component to this. Adding these tariffs, across the board, and then the targeted ones, especially, for example, with China. Keep in mind that as our dollars leave our borders to buy these goods in a trade deficit world, the nations we buy from wind up with more dollars than they can use domestically. They have to put those dollars someplace. That comes back into the United States in forms of lower interest rates and inflated stock market valuations. So with this trade war, we're going to see that flow of investment dollars back to the US diminish. We're also going to see a lot of companies reporting much lower first quarter earnings and giving much lower guidance for the rest of the year. That's going to take a huge chunk out of everybody's 401ks, their savings plans, the diminished employment across the United States, not only from the layoffs in Washington, but from people unable to make their earnings from the increased tariffs, is going to throw the United States into a significant recession. Again, the midterms are coming very, very quickly. But let's think. Let me give one more little
Sure.
quickie example. The 25% tariffs on steel. That's increasing the cost of repairing highways and bridges across the United States. That's infrastructure that is crumbling. I mean, Trump knows this extraordinarily well. He's built buildings. They haven't crumbled yet that I know of, but still, that's a problem. And so the highway departments, the last time he did this to steel, for example, Texas announced they were going to have to cut back 10 to 15% on their road repair for that following season. So we can see that trickle down through the economy in terms of less miles repaired, less buildings repaired, and quite honestly, higher unemployment.
What did you make of the many, 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 many boasts that Trump made about how much he had improved things, either during Trump 1.0 or in just a few months since he's become president around this time around? I mean, I was sitting there thinking, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. And over and over again. And it's almost like it's he's living in bizarro world that, what did you make of that?
Well, it doesn't hold water. It's a different view of reality. Um, you know, like it or not, Biden left him with a thriving economy, very low unemployment, uh, relatively low interest rates, and a booming stock market. And so far, under Trump 2.0, he's done his best to diminish all of that. The market's off a tremendous amount since he took office.
And I never thought any president could make you say nice things about Joe Biden. And that's probably the last time you will say something nice about Joe Biden. I wanted to
Fine.
make the point that
I'm getting some interference on the line, Markham.
yes, I just wanted to make the point for viewers who aren't familiar, maybe have not seen our previous interviews, that you've been critical about Biden in the past,
I
and
have,
so
and but certainly from the perspective that I have, the trade and lowering trade barriers, that was something that Eisenhower made a hallmark of his administration. Remember, this guy had fought and led the Allies to victory in World War II. He traveled the globe during his two terms as president to lower barriers, to increase the interreliance of nations, to knock down these barriers, to really kind of give adversaries less of a reason to be adversarial over time. And in the space of weeks, Trump is unwinding U.S. policy initiatives that have been in place for more than 70 years.
I don't know if you've ever heard of Premier Peter Lougheed, who was the premier of Alberta from 1971 to 1986. He was basically his moves created the oil sands, the petrochemical industry that Alberta has, the second largest petrochemical cluster in North America. On and on and on. He was kind of an Eisenhower-esque premier, to use your terms. And he has 6 principles for responsible natural resource development. One of them is practice statecraft. Practice statecraft. And this is something we don't see politicians do anymore. You just mentioned how Eisenhower went around to the various countries and persuaded them to knock down barriers, persuaded them to work with them, United States, to build a rules-based trading order, international order. That's statecraft, and that works. Trump, whatever the opposite of statecraft is, that would appear to be Donald Trump.
Even George W. Bush, as governor of Texas, was making trips to Mexico, meeting with the president of Mexico, meeting with the presidents of the local states to encourage trade and friendly relations, if you will, because of course, most of what we do with Mexico is legitimate business, services, travel, families, very closely interdependent economies along the southern border. Then when he was president, his first visit was to Mexico. This is someone who came from a politically attuned family with all the pluses and minuses, but someone who, to your point, actually could understand what statecraft was about, as opposed to a real estate developer in New York who, of course, lost money on his hotels in Vancouver and Toronto, had those closed, and has failed with casinos. Goodness, how do you fail running a casino? That's a mystery for all of us. The Sopranos actually never touched on that.
We also don't know how he failed selling steaks or university training education. All a great mystery. Well, okay, so we've talked about the tariffs are staying status quo in Canada and Mexico. We're talking about this new order, economic order, trading order that Trump seems to be trying to create, with the U.S. at the center of it, returning to historic strength in industry and manufacturing. We've talked about his absolutely incoherent policy framework. Nobody can figure out where this is going. His bizarre, warped view of facts and evidence, and doesn't understand economic theory. Wrap all that up if you can, and look out into the future and tell us what we're likely to be seeing in the next 6 to 12, maybe months, maybe 2 years.
We're going to see a severe recession in the United States. Congress is going to have to act to, protect the federal government and protect the national economy. Without positive action, we will just go into a recession. By the time the next election rolls around, beyond the midterm election, nobody will be interested in seeing any kind of furtherance of these types of policies. And whatever the succeeding administration is going to be, is going to spend a huge amount of time going around the world trying to mend fences. We've had global prosperity on a scale unknown to mankind, and we're just about to diminish it for the next 4 years, if not for the next generation.
And in the process, empower China to dominate large swaths of the economy by moving into the global south now, both as an exporter to that area, but also they now have a localization strategy, much like the Japanese did in the 80s and 90s, where they're building, BYD in Brazil and Turkey and Vietnam and so on. And so at the very time that the United States should be showing strength and leadership, it's going in the opposite direction. That's not good news.
Well, as Trump was lecturing Zelensky of Ukraine and telling him he didn't have the cards, here we've got someone who has all the cards, who's just frittering them away and quite literally giving away the chips.
Yeah,
Who could not be happier? Every Asian economy is thrilled. Vladimir Putin is looking at his largest potential adversary, deliberately weakening its relationships with potential allies, weakening its own internal economy, quite apart from the dismantling of the U.S. intelligence system and network.
yes, indeed. Well, Ed, on that cheery note, thank you very much for this. Always appreciate talking to you. And as this progresses, we were going to have you back to explain it to us because it is clearly a mess. Thank you very much for this.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.